Welcome back, y'all. We are here with another episode of Meet Your Maker, a series by Horror Joy celebrating horror creators, authors, filmmakers, everything that you can imagine. Anybody who makes a world, that's who we want to celebrate. And today we have a very special guest, somebody I am very, very excited to talk with. I have followed you on social media for a long time. You've been incredibly influential in the horror genre on social media with 2 books, 101 horror books to read before you're murdered. And now we are coming out with a second book called Feral and Hysterical. This is a really good book. You allowed us to read it and see it before it came out, and this is really incredible. If you haven't guessed, everybody, we are here with Sadie Hartman, also known as Mother Horror. Sadie, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk to you guys.
We're really excited to talk to you. One question that we have, and it's kind of the guiding principle of the podcast, is about the relationship between joy and horror. For a lot of people, this makes sense. For others, it doesn't. I'm curious what you have to say. Do you think that this relationship between joy and horror makes sense?
Yes, I think I discovered this. Well, I think I discovered it and didn't know what I was doing with it intentionally, a long time ago. So I've always been reading horror and didn't know that I was using it as, an escape or getting any kind of comfort or joy out of it, apart from just, the basics of just reading. But I didn't know the relationship between joy and horror until I think COVID. When COVID first hit and we were all in lockdown and there was a lot of anxiety that I was experiencing, I kind of just went headlong into horror. I read a book. Well, I read Hell House by Richard Matheson in one day. And it was like the day that we were told that we would be, social distancing and being like in our homes indefinitely. And I just turned off the news and I stopped doom scrolling and I jumped into Hell House and I actually broke my eyeballs. I don't know what I did, but ended up having to get a prescription for eyeglasses after I did that. I didn't stop reading the entire day. And then I just read like 250 some odd books that year and realized that I was getting joy and comfort from reading about people who are going through worse situations than we were. That was where the joy was coming in.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we know that you also have an interest in it, well, interest might be the wrong word because we're kind of all living through the horrors of the political landscape of the United States right now. I think in some ways, like, people view horror as not an escape, but I like how you're talking about it out, how it is a way we can escape some of the actual real horrors around us and to retreat into these sort of created horrors that seem to have some sort of sense of control about them. Maybe just to jump right into it, how do we do that right now, given the state of affairs, given that we wake up in the morning and the headlines you're reading seem like something you would see in a disaster novel or a disaster film, or some of the legislation we see being passed is something you might see like on the Hunger Games. So like, how do we maintain our love for horror while still existing in a world that's becoming more and more horrific?
That's a really good question. And I will sideline and just say, like, every time I ever talk about horror on social media, especially like Blue Sky or Threads where people are like gathering around the water cooler to talk, every time I publish a review or put out book recommendations, I met with people who are like, why are you reading this? This is so dark. Like, isn't there enough horror in the world, right now to satisfy you? Like, this is so bleak. And I just kind of thought like, well, A, like we should be judging each other's, comfort in this time. And B, like, no, I feel like everything that I'm feeling and all the anxiety and all the fear and all the frustration and anger that I'm feeling is mirrored back to me in these books. And I'm seeing protagonists and heroes going through what I'm going through and what we're all going through and having hope and determination and fortitude. Like, I'm seeing it in my literature, like how people are going forward and just with all the hope, and I can kind of get that kind of solace and comfort and see people going through these crazy things that we never would have imagined. I mean, in some ways, yes, we have imagined it, but to actually live it, it feels way different. So yeah, that's why. For me personally, I don't want to read like literary or, contemporary literary books or fantasy or, romance or whatever, like for me, that feels more of a distraction than reading something that's actually as horrific as what we're going through.
Yeah, I think something that we talked a little bit about just on social media is this idea that politics and horror are not like, you can't really pull them apart in a very clean way. And so I am curious. So I've landed on this idea that horror is always political. And we can have like maybe conservative horror, and we can talk about what was going on maybe in the 70s, 60s. Even then, though, I think there's a transgressive vein of horror. Even now, or maybe especially now, it seems as though horror has become pretty transgressive politically. And
yeah,
there are people that want to push that away. But I think in many ways, I want to embrace that. And I didn't know if you had thoughts about how we might think of horror as participating in our political discourse, which is very fraught right now.
Yeah. So my favorite book that I read last year was called The Reformatory by Tananarive Due. And it's a historical fiction about a young man who fights back against an aggressor, and it was racially charged. He was a young Black boy, a teenager, and his sister was being accosted by a much larger white person of importance in the community. And he fights back and finds himself in a reform school that is notorious for, harming these children who end up there and also, killing them. And it was terrifying and it was heartbreaking. And there were times where I didn't want to turn the pages because it's real. Like the story it's fictionalized, but it's based on a true story. It's based on Tananarive Due's uncle, whom they found buried in an unmarked grave behind a reform school. So very real terrors that happened. And, I also read a book this year. My favorite book so far this year is called The Bat Eater and Other Names for Cora Zhang, which is also highly politically charged in the sense that it happened during COVID and it was during Asian hate. So it really opens my eyes to hearing a perspective from someone who went through it and a people group that has a voice and has an opinion and has something they need to say. And I don't necessarily grab nonfiction books. So getting it from my fiction really, really lands. Like it really penetrates. And I will remember that story more than if I read an article about it.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think kind of what you're talking about here with using fiction as a way of learning something about like a nonfiction event, right? And we did an episode on Tananarive Due's The Reformatory with Sinners not long ago, and it is phenomenal. It's a great book. I listened to the audiobook version, which I really enjoyed. And again, I'm going to forget the name of the narrator, but that was really phenomenal. But that's making me think about the way you're discussing vibes in Feral and Hysterical. I love this idea of reclaiming vibes as something that is not like the Joe Rogan podcast, where it's just like, we're going to use vibes because it feels good. And that's what we're going to do. And my stupid, silly, wrinkled meathead is going to have ideas that spew out of my face hole that make no sense. But here in your book, you're using vibes as this organizational structure for us to navigate all these really awesome books that are out there. And I thought that was fantastic. So I like the definition you offer in the introduction, where a mood's an internal, temporary, emotional state of mind, whereas vibes are a distinctive external vibration capable of being sensed, which gives the objects themselves some agency, which I love. I really do. So can you talk about what led you to this structure? I think that's really neat. So I'd like to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, so visually I see it almost like movies and books too, are having a conversation with each other. And you'll feel it when, for instance, when you're watching Andor. I don't know if you guys have watched Andor on Disney Plus, but it's very it's a conversation between the characters that we're having in our real world right now. So it's basically a dictatorship taking over and the people rising up against that dictatorship. So a lot of the conversations that the people are having are conversations that we're having at home. And then they're conversations that books are having that I'm reading. And so I kind of see it as these vibrations that are coming from our neck, from our throat, of these conversations that we're having as the same as the director, having the same vibration, having this vibration with the book. And then when you sync them all together, you're like having this experience among media, like even when you're listening to music in the car that's also speaking the same language, is like the way that we're telling stories to one another that's in sync. And so I feel like when I'm curating reading lists for people, like this book is full of the reading lists, there are books that are in conversation. So you'll be reading something and you'll go, oh my God, I just read that in this other book over here, but this author lives in Argentina and this author lives in, Haiti, and these books are talking to each other, and it really excites me.
I've been thinking a lot about this idea of like a horror playlist. So we've had conversations with Kat Silva, and she talked about the kind of music that she would listen to and putting together a playlist that was something that helped when she wrote. In, Feral and Hysterical, you are offering a kind of horror playlist of reading, right? So it's a reading list, but it's also a playlist. And I love the way that you're describing what you're saying here, because it feels very musical in the sense that sometimes things resonate and sometimes they don't, right? The vibrations can come together and we can get harmonious sounds, right? Or we can get dissonant sounds if they just don't go together. And something that I really like is there are times I know when I'm listening in my mood, I hear a song or an album that I love and I just hate it. I hate it so much because of my mood, right? And I think there's something about reading, this vibes reading, that I think really hits. And it's really kind of a special thing that you're articulating. There's this part in the introduction where you really describe your project as highlighting in many ways, the oppressive nature of the authorial seat in some ways, that women weren't really allowed to express themselves. And in some ways, what you're doing is pushing back. I wondered if you could just help us understand that project a little bit more here.
Yeah, so I mean, just being somebody who fell in love with horror at an early age, all of the horror books that I was reading when I was younger were from a male gaze and a male perspective. Like I was reading Peter Straub and I was reading Stephen King and Clive Barker and these like pillars of the horror genre, writing women from their perception. And as good as they are at it sometimes, like Stephen King's debut novel, Carrie, is definitely from a perspective of a young teenage girl. And it kind of blows your mind that he was able to crawl in there and pull some authenticity out of it. The fact still remains that, when Grady Hendrix is writing My Best Friend's Exorcism and he's writing Carrie, and, you have these female protagonists from a male gaze, it's still from a man. And so the importance, I think, is that women have been suppressed and our voices have been pushed back into our throats, sometimes strangled out of our throats. And we've been locked up. We've been told that we can't have an opinion. We've been told that we can't have our own agency. We've been pushed back into the kitchen. We've been told we couldn't vote. There's a lot of ways in which our opinions and our voices don't matter. And you look at this current age right now, and you have, the Epstein files. Everyone's clamoring for the Epstein files, but there are so many women who have already gone on record to tell you what has happened. They've already said their story. They've already told us what happened, but we need the Epstein files, And then you have a woman fighting right alongside the patriarchy, telling whatever kind of lie she wants to tell and they want her to tell, gaslighting the American people. So it's just frustrating to see that kind of sliding backward into where we've already been and where we always are. And so that's why I feel like Feral and Hysterical, a chance and a moment where I got to just kind of push this forward and say, there's over 250 different books in here from a woman's perspective about the horrors that we live every day from our side. And a man isn't telling this story, and it's not from a male gaze. We're talking about real situations that we go through and have been through and will always go through. These are our challenges. Like, let us tell our stories.
I think that's really powerful. I mean, I think this is one of the opportunities that horror gives folks, like to share their voice, to share their story. we're living in a great moment as far as horror novels go and horror fiction, horror creation goes, because there is so much great horror being written right now, especially by women. So like, as you were talking, I'm thinking about Virginia Fado's Victorian Psycho and how that is doing everything you're saying, where it's like, it's taking this, even this like Victorian type novel that may have been written from a woman's perspective, someone like Jane Austen, someone like one of the Brontes, but it's like, it's making it completely like just batshit. And it's a quick read. It's a great read. It definitely leaves its mark, but I think it's like, it's showing us that women have these experiences, but it's like, I don't think we should need to be shown that. Like this is, but like many men are like, oh, women too think and feel this way. I didn't know that. This isn't something Tucker Carlson ever prepared me for.
Yeah, and it's like so frustrating to me because you'll still see reviews for Victorian Psycho where people are just like saying how unrealistic it is, or, you know, like I support, you know, women, but like this was just, you know, a psychotic slide into madness or whatever. And like, I can't believe she did this or that to the children. Like, think of the children. And I'm just like, are you joking? Like, we still say like American Psycho is one of the greatest like horror novels of all time. We've made a movie off of it. Like, people quote it. Like, you know, give me a break. Like, if men can be horrible and rotten villains, like so can women.
I think that's so funny to me that, like, yeah, what's his name? Patrick Bateman? Is that the guy from American Psycho? That's the character?
Yeah,
Like in some way he becomes a hero to people. Like, I don't know why that people go, I'm just gonna let you know now. I have watched that once and I hated it. So I'm not sure if I'm the audience here, but I think all of what you're saying is really important. And I think you were just talking and I was like, I don't know. How could I possibly add to that? I just want to like snap my fingers and be like, I don't know. Yep. Sadie, you just
oh, we could do that too.
keep going. Yeah. But I think that the kind of way that you've organized the book, and even the highlighting of this etymology of hysteria, I think you tied it to uterus. Is that right?
Yeah.
It is so perfect because in many ways, the way that worlds emerge, right, as like this birthing of these narratives and stories, it feels as though we should be saying women are, in fact, the most qualified to tell these stories. And I think that's part of what you're saying already. The experiences that women have had that have not been highlighted, not been listened to, are what equip them or should make us, everybody in the audience, say, yeah, they're the most qualified to tell these horror stories. They're the ones that we should be listening to. And so I think this book is doing something really important. And if y'all have not had it on your radar yet, get it on your radar. This is one. Tell us when it comes out.
Yeah, so I just got my copy yesterday. This is the final edition. There's artwork in here by a really talented artist in Argentina. And it's like all women produced. My editor is a woman. My publicity team are women. My daughter illustrated some things in here. And it comes out on August 19th from Page Street Horror. Yeah, it's pretty much available wherever books are sold. You can get it from thebookshop.org is highly recommended because you can support indie bookstores. That way they give like a percentage of their money to indie bookstores, which is cool. I did want to say really quick, I know that we, allotted a certain amount of time, but it reminded me when we were talking about like hysterical and feral and all of this stuff and like not being heard, it reminds me of how we got to this place, because Hillary Clinton told us exactly what was going to happen. She has verbatim told us exactly what was going to happen. And then Kamala told us the same thing, but it's just kind of like, is this place ever going to be ready for a woman leader? I don't think so. I would hope so. But we have had a succession of white men making our decisions for us. Is very frustrating, especially when we've heard what Kamala said. We heard what Hillary said. We get to watch a woman president in Mexico be radical with changing her country and even helping us. And the gaslighting is is other level. Like it's really hard. It's really hard right now.
I mean, yeah, I'm thinking about like this is, I don't know if I was listening to this on the Majority Report or Secular Talk with Kyle Kalinske or might have been the Midas Touch Network. I don't know. One of the hate listening experiences, like I love the podcast, but like just I hate the world we're in. So like, you know, when I'm trying to make my day somehow feel worse or my blood pressure spike, but they were talking about how like people thought that Hillary would be too hysterical or Kamala would be too hysterical or women are too emotional to govern. And it's like, have you seen this orange baboon masquerading as like a leader? Like he's like a child. He's a petulant toddler. And it's worse this time around because his brain is just filled with cooked mashed potatoes at this point. It's like nothing is firing. But it's not just him. It's the entire administration. It's Pete Hegseth, who, you know, is always about 2 drinks deep and emotional as a result, or just emotional all the time. It's Tom Homan, the ice guy. It's JD Vance and his bad mascara and his restraining order from couches. It's you know, like it's all of these men are hyper emotional, and they get like just they go off into these fits of rage when people even dare question them. It's like just this fascistic authoritarianism. And you're right. Like, I mean, I'm not a woman, so I can't like feel exactly what you're talking about, but it's pretty clear as an objective observer that like I like you've been gaslit. Like you've been gaslit your entire life. And every time we're like, yeah, it's going to get better. Surely. Like as a teacher, I look into my classrooms a lot and I see a lot of young women, you know, young men, young non-binary folks, like a bunch of young people in general, but especially young women, because, you know, colleges are made up more and more of women at this point. And I'm like, you are going to be the future leaders if we live in a world that will take you seriously. And it's like, and we shouldn't have to be having this conversation in 2025. Like, it's just wild. I mean, to get back to like to horror for a second, it reminds me a lot of Mary Shelley with Frankenstein, how we know that Percy Shelley went in and re-edited the whole damn thing. Like the version that we all had come to know was actually the one that Percy had gone through and just edited all of the kind of more radical feminist thought out of. And thankfully, like, you know, some academics and scholars have helped us put back together what we think was the original. But again, like the silencing of women, the gaslighting of women, the general second class citizening, that's a long one, but of women.
It's painful. It is a painful process to go through and just be told that our opinions don't matter and that we are, you know, being hysterical or blaming it on us having periods. You know, women go through menopause. I've already like been there, done that, had a hysterectomy. Like in your 40s, you don't give a fuck. Like I feel like women have so much more wisdom and like maturity, emotional maturity, the older we get. You can't even tell us that we're on our periods and being irrational. We're past that at this point, you know, some of us. And so why are you not listening to us now? You know, like what's the excuse now? And it is just gaslighting because they know it's true. Like we've said before, every accusation is a confession. Like every time they accuse, it is something that they are indeed doing. So when they tell women like you're too emotional to lead this country, you are too emotional to lead this country. You know, you're lying, you're cheating, you're sleeping your way to the top. No, you are lying and cheating and sleeping your way to the top. You are having, you know, sex with whoever you want to with zero consequences and your boys back you up. Like it is beyond the pale. Like it at this point, like I don't understand why women don't just walk out in the street like they did in Iceland and say, we don't have any rights. Okay, well, fuck everybody. We're not going to make your food. We're not going to wash your clothes. We're not going to show up to work. We're not going to do all the heavy lifting of the emotional labor that we do at our jobs for everyone. We're just going to walk out and not do anything until we grind this shit to a halt. That's what I think we should do.
Yeah, I mean, you make this point too, I think, in the book where you say, like, there's this double standard where the emotion that men shows up as strength, right? So Hegseth just says he's a warrior, and that accounts for or allows for his emotional outbursts. Oh, I'm being a warrior, right? That's what it is. Whereas women are seen as hysterical,
right?
Which is it's gross. It's really gross. I do want to, if we can, steer back towards some joy And I want to ask
Yes.
you, you have done so much work. I think, just following you online, there's a joy there. I do, of course, want to plug your book subscription service, Nightworms. Also, you package up joy and send it to them. But I'm curious, right? Having read so much horror, you're just in it. Is there something exciting that you have read or watched or played that has generated a sense of joy in connection with horror recently?
Well, I mean, the movie Sinners unlocked a new layer. We have exceeded some kind of level in the game that we're playing for horror movies. That one just leveled us up. And so I think people are going to be talking about that movie, and that's going to become the gold standard from now on. If like a movie can't reach those levels of brilliance, then I just think like that's the conversation we're going to be having. That's the measuring stick now. And that just generated a lot of like excitement for that kind of historical fiction that is like layered with a lot of resistance, with a lot of racial, socio-political stuff going on under the surface. So it was really fun on Bookstagram, which is, Instagram centered around books, talking about books that repeat that vision. We talked about Djèlí Clarke's book Ringshout, which is also like fantasy, historical, fighting back against the KKK. Like, we've had like so many conversations now about what we're seeing as big thrusts of horror in movies that pushes, we float when we hit a big rise like that. And I think Sinners did that for horror. And then people like Stephen Graham Jones is definitely blowing the lid and breaking glass ceilings in horror. My shirt says I'd rather be reading Stephen Graham Jones. And I mean, what he's doing, putting out novels like every single year that is just a banger after a banger. You had, I Was a Teenage Slasher, which was amazing. And then you have Buffalo Hunter, which is also historical fiction, which is also talking about racial oppression. I mean, there is exciting things happening in horror, and we're saying the quiet parts out loud in our fiction. So I think that those conversations are really, really exciting. And that gives me joy to see art going places that we physical people can't do, or, we get to sneak those under the radar somehow. I don't know.
Yeah, Sadie, I think that's powerful. Yeah, Stephen Graham Jones, his work is incredible. All of the things that you've talked about, Sinners, The Reformatory, I mean, all of these books, I think, are hitting at such a strong stride. I mean, we didn't mention a ton of books that I think are doing this work of bringing horror and politics together, but you, I think, have hit a clear current, right? I want to thank you for being here with us, for talking through with us, for, I don't know, kind of working through our anger at the state of the world politically, especially in the United States, but also helping us to bring that back with some joy in horror. Your work online, your work with these books, Feral and Hysterical, out August 19th. It's amazing. So thank you for your words. Thank you for all of the things that you've done for the horror community and for being here with us. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for all the kind words and the conversation, and for following and supporting and inviting me here. Just want to share with your listeners that I am on Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky. Pretty much just share book recommendations every day is like my favorite thing to do. So,
but in such a cool way. In 2020, COVID hitting the aesthetic of that COVID bookstagram, it was something that brought me a lot of comfort, and I think a lot of people too. So thank you again, and that is it for today. As always, folks, find joy even in horror. This has been an episode of Horror Joy, produced in conjunction with Axis Mundi Media. Thanks for joining us. We want to hear from you. You can find us at Horror Joy Pod on Instagram or at Horror Joy Pod on YouTube. You can also email us at horrorjoypod@gmail.com, all one word. And you can, of course, find us wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a like, subscribe, leave a review. Until next time, remember, seek joy, even in horror.